All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Welcome to Where's the Nuance with El Nino. Today, I'm very excited because we have Bob Peck. Bob Peck is an author, I guess, kind of Christian turned mystic sage, and he's also a documentary filmmaker who made The Kingdom Is Within. It was really, really great getting to connect with Bob's work because not unlike myself, we both come from Christian backgrounds, or myself more Catholic, him a little bit more of a Christian idea background. But we both came to a very, I guess, new age idea or realization that there is a oneness within a lot of the holy scriptures, a kind of universal message of love and awareness and kindness and compassion that you see in a lot of these historical figures like Buddha, Krishna, and Jesus Christ. And Bob also wrote a book, and I'm happy to have it here, which is called Original Sin is a Lie: How Spirituality Defies Dogma and Reveals Our True Self. Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Nino. It's funny, I followed you for a long time, like probably a year. And then when we connected, you were like, oh, whoa, he already follows me. Like, yeah, I've admired your work for a long time. So it's great to connect, and really glad you're enjoying the book, and happy to talk about it and give some value to your listeners.
You know, there's something that you mentioned in the book, not to jump ahead too much, but you were talking about proving your spiritualness in there, and how I think a lot of us who are spiritually inclined, you know, there are moments in time where we feel like, you know, the ego arises and we feel like, oh, like I have to prove that I'm about this spiritual life. Like I'm not a poser. I didn't go to one yoga class and start saying namaste. And in some ways, it's been really awesome for me when I feel like these semi-older men and who have this scholarly and academic knowledge like yourself seem to like me and my presence and what I'm doing online, because I'm like, haha, this is a confirmation. I have been reaffirmed that I am on the right path. So I appreciate you, man. Really.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, likewise. Yeah, for a year I done yoga meditation about 10-15 years, and wow. That kind of even dropping that to the Gen Z's, I'm like, well, I've been doing that. And then I see comments of people that are like, yeah, I met, Muktananda in 1975. And it's like, how do those guys feel, right, about even like our generation kind of.
So how has that path been for you then? Kind of moving towards this, because I mean, the online TikTok space and everything is very new. Let's be honest. This is a very like new arena in the digital landscape, but here you are, having been someone, like you said, 10, 15 years in the yogic tradition, meditating for 10, 15 years as well. How did you make this transition onto the digital landscape? And, what's the story? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, totally. Let's jump in. The funny thing about kind of my background is I was a child comedian. I don't think I write about that in the book.
No, you don't.
But I did like stand up when I was a kid in middle school and high school, and I killed. And I just didn't pursue it. I went to college at UT, University of Texas at Austin, and which is where I'm from and where I live. And I just met so many funnier guys, I like that were just effortless to me and like just natural. And I feel like I really kind of had to work at it and write revisions and stuff like that, even though I have a natural humor or whatever. And I met all these other guys, but I was at the same time, I was getting really heavy into religious scholarship and reading Yogananda, who I'm sure we'll talk about, but who was like massive for me. Actually, there he is. Not quite a devotee, but I do like the guy. And I was reading really kind of deep spiritual literature and comparative religion classes, all this stuff. And I was like, I'm going to be a spiritual filmmaker. And so that's what I did. In my 20s, I kind of, instead of comedian angle, I just veered hard into like almost like BBC. Like I was like 23 and I was like making very slow paced religious documentary. And I did not make a living because my joke was that even there was a like God documentary series on Netflix, and like Morgan Freeman narrated it, and like no one watched it. And I was like, you can have the highest production value, one of the biggest actors in the world, and it's a tough scene. But I'm proud of that work. It did play in some festivals, some of those films, And it helped obviously inform kind of who I am creatively and spiritually. And started writing. My dad's a writer. He wrote a couple of novels. He's not very well read, but he's super gifted. And so I always kind of knew I had a writing quality. And so I started writing kind of nonfiction pieces about like Easter through a yogic lens, and that kind of East and West commentaries and stuff like that, and posted on Facebook and to my personal thing, and then started putting on Medium, and looked up after a few years, and I had like 50,000 words. Wow. And a nonfiction book, you only need about 60, 70 plus. And so I spent a few years, about 5 years total of writing his original Sin is a Lie. And it's been really beautiful. My wife told me to start posting on TikTok about a year ago. And I just said, I'm going to do one video a day for 30 days. I have this book that's done. I was like trying to get kind of permissions stuff. And I just said, I'll do one a day for 30 days. If nothing happens, doesn't matter. And if something does, cool. And like the 14th day, I had a video that like got pretty big, and it was like, okay, like I think I found I post on Instagram and lose followers. So I'm like, I'll go where the people are listening from a community standpoint. And like Spiritual Talk has been really, really cool. And we can talk about that too, but it's been kind of affirming for me. You talk about validation in a sense. It's been affirming for me to have people say, hey, this really helped me kind of work through some religious trauma. And, I think kind of stepping into the book and the work for people, what I'm really trying to do, Nino, is tell folks, that kind of left religion, basically post-Christians, to say, hey, don't throw out the baby with the bath. I think that's what secular world has done. We worship science and technology. Those things are fantastic. We're talking on Zoom right now, and we've connected through apps and all these things. But there's a tendency to kind of go all or nothing with religion.
Yep.
And it's been a profound joy for me to find, to your point earlier, kind of the perennial philosophy and the wisdom of the pearls, the string between the pearls, if you will, which is this timeless unification, oneness. Yeah, exactly. And the more and the deeper you go into it, the more kind of the barriers melt away. I mean, they don't even exist anymore. So yeah, that's, I guess, pretty nutshell.
That's awesome. See, I'll give a little bit of pushback. See, I do think that the rise of secularism actually did not, I don't think that people worship science and stuff. What actually happened is we now have false idols. Like we worship the stupidest things ever, like money. We worship celebrities. We worship ideas that are like fundamentally like divisive and stuff, like now like these gender ideologies, whatever it might be. And again, this is I'm very liberal. I'm very socially liberal. Everyone should do as they please. I'm libertarian in values. But I would think that not to be an alarmist, but I think that the huge rise of secularism, and it's quite like your father's story a little bit, and why I think maybe this inspired you a bit when like reading your work. It's like your father was kind of brought back from this hard atheist standpoint by this amazing woman, right, who lent him into the spiritual realm through a different avenue, right, instead of an organized religion. And I see people like you as being these messengers that are so necessary in our culture. It's like going, hey, look, we have all had a bad time with the churches, like, let's be honest. And like, we have the internet now, we have too much evidence that humans are corrupt, and humans are not infallible. And when you're given positions of power, it's even in a church, even in a religious organization, they abuse that power, and that's created a sense of trauma. But that trauma has created such a gap between the connection to this beautiful divine doctrine, right? These teachings that I think we need as a society. I think it's an ailment to our suffering, because so much of our suffering is this discontentment, this disconnection with ourselves, because we feel so separated from one another. So I really do. For me, I don't want to underplay the importance and role of people like yourself, because I honestly and I'm not a conservative, but I do in my heart know that this growing secularism is becoming extreme, to the point that the way that the human psyche works, it's always going to need meaning and kind of religious thinking. But if spirituality is no longer there, then something will replace it. And that's what you're seeing. Then there's these books by like John McWhorter, The New Religion of Anti-Racism, for instance, right? And like there are these new ideologies rising up that are being treated by the people who follow them as if they were religions, because they're just lent on faith. They don't need data. They don't need evidence. They just believe wholeheartedly. Everything is
They need a banner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
why
Well said.
That's why I'm happy for you, man. For your
Well, may my work be a sincere message. I really appreciate you saying that. This friend of mine who's kind of psychedelically motivated was like, he goes, "You didn't write it." I like that. So, and part of me was like, "You're right, man," and then the other part of me was like, "I spent a lot of time on it. I really worked hard. It was a lot of mornings."
Like, you son of a bitch, I put a lot of my time into it. That's my time.
Right.
Well, let's get into the book a little bit.
Yeah.
You start the book by kind of going, hey, look, let's all be honest. All these religions, even Christianity, it's a big game of telephone. Why don't you like dive into that? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, you and I chatted about the Avatar doctrine earlier, which is a kind of a nice place to start kind of for me in terms of like mystic philosophy and mystic spirituality for people. There's a Hindu holy text called the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm sure you're familiar, and just for anyone who's not, it's timeless, it's brilliant. It's a small sliver of an epic narrative called the Mahabharata, which is, I think it's 18x the Bible or something like that. Some crazy, just I haven't read it. But the Gita is short. It's a dialogue between basically the mightiest warrior in the land, Arjuna, who's kind of like a Achilles.
Right.
And they're on a battlefield. And the other person that he talks to is not actually a person, it's a divine being named Krishna, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. And Krishna is a Christ-like figure. And it's basically like Arjuna hesitates. They're about to go into this big battle, and not to go in too far into this, but he basically looks across and sees all of his cousins, and the guy who taught him, he's like the best archer in the world. He sees his archery teacher on the other side. He's like, I don't want to fight these people. And Krishna kind of counsels him and basically says, it's a lot about dharma and responsibility and duty of this lifetime, and also the eternality of the soul, and kind of walking the tightrope between what we're doing here on this plane and what we're doing in an eternal plane. It's just a beautiful, and it's just very short. You can read it in a few days, but it take a lifetime. But one of the things that Krishna says is, it's called the Avatar doctrine. I think it's chapter 4, and he says, essentially, when wickedness takes over in the land of the world, I rise to set virtue upon her seat again. There's this kind of divine being that takes a manifestation when things get out of hand, and it's pendulum-like. It's almost like the evil energy or karma, so on, of the world kind of creates the need for that incarnation to appear. And I think the world mystics, people like Yogananda, talk about how that's the founders of the religions, that's the holiest saints and sages. It's men and women throughout history, different centuries and different time periods and locations and cultures. And there's just different little kind of, towers of humanity, if you will, that just embody this state of unconditional love and oneness, and kind of break the veil, to use some of that terminology. And so, that's kind of the claim that I make in the book around Jesus as, being this kind of institutional reformer, loving figure who said one thing, and very quickly after that was misinterpreted and given this whole, all these layers and layers of, dogmatic stuff by lesser men, like original sin, which Jesus says 0 things about in the New Testament. And I just had a comment the other day that said, this is you're misrepresenting what Jesus said. I said, well, if you can find me the verse, I don't usually get too back and forthy with folks, but anyway, Jesus, really great, big fan of that Galilean philosopher. And yeah, it was a joy, kind of getting into that first section of the book. It was a real joy to me. I took formative Christianity, New Testament scholarship classes at UT, and I was kind of already mystic, oriented, and it was such a relief for me, Nino, when I was going through those classes and taking, I think I took 4 or 5 classes on Jesus, 2 on Paul, 2 on the Apocrypha, and it was very clear to me that everything that I had an issue with was later. I mean, just about, and everything that was really great tended to be very early. And that really inspired me to, start writing about it and really start pointing out to, that reality. And I'm not as well versed in all the religions, but that seems to be a similar thread. Even Buddha, there's a bunch of sects of Buddhism nowadays. It's like this happens over and over again. There's a really pure being of love and unconditional unity, and then just the separation tendency of human egos.
I guess my question then, just on an individual level, less scholarly, but more from Bob, it's like, then do you think that technically, I mean, you kind of do reiterate this in the book, but technically anybody could become like Gita, could embody Jesus could embody Christ consciousness. In that sense, I wonder how many Christs we've missed in history. How many have we killed when they've arisen, like in this second coming of Christ, right? And you do put some emphasis on this, right? He says the kingdom of heaven is within you, not among you, not among us. Those are mistranslations. And
Right.
I preach this constantly, that the kingdom of heaven is within us, right? And if we have to look inwards, we have to, right? For me, I believe that we have to heal our psychological wounds so that we can actually get there, because a lot of us hold psychological wounds that prevent us from it. And like Ram Dass has so elegantly suggested in his book, Be Here Now, that I think it's called.
Yes.
If you don't heal those psychological wounds and you try to, walk that path, you will come out of it going, I am Jesus Christ, as if you are the Jesus Christ, because you didn't, there are real psychological, wounds and trauma and healing that one must abide by and go through, because otherwise the spiritual path has an inclination towards this kind of egomania. And I think that's this balance of how many people begin to walk the path of Christ, but then they just become egomaniacs, because there is a power, I guess, in realizing that the kingdom of heaven is within you. There is this self-assuredness, there is a power in it, right? And
really great. I mean, first thing I say to that is what the mystics describe, kind of awakening or enlightenment, or these terms of kind of undoing the ego gradually, basically. I mean, gradually is time-based, so it does, which isn't a part of the capital R reality, but for some it's instantaneous, like a Sri Ramana Maharshi or someone, but for the rest of us, it takes a few go rounds. And what you're doing is you're basically just undoing your own ignorance about yourself, because underneath it all is that true connection, is that capital O oneness. And I think there is ego, absolutely, with the spiritual path and the spiritual power. And I mean, the Indian philosophy, like both Buddhist and Hindu traditions, talk a lot about kind of guru, like even avoiding the powers. They're called siddhis in Hindu philosophy, siddhi. And Ramakrishna, for example, says, be really careful about them, because you will obtain psychic, capacities to be able to influence other people and all these things. And there's so many stories in kind of the Ramakrishna material and Yogananda material, for example, that talk about people who abused that. And it's kind of an up and down karmic thing. That what happens, zooming out on that from this vantage point, is that they have the karmic repercussion of that, and then they don't, and then they do, and then they don't. I mean, it's this kind of the wheel of samsara is what it's called. It's just gigantic wheel that's turning over and over again. So I don't I don't lament too much kind of people that we've lost, quote unquote. I mean, I hear the missed opportunity that you're talking about, but I think that it's all working in this grand way of up and down and kind of cyclical beauty, that it just, any stressing about that is a wasted energy, because it's just unraveling, you know.
No kidding. Thank you. Yeah, I feel that.
You're here. I mean, it's, you said Taoism earlier, you know, Tao, like
yeah,
surrendering to the Tao of it. Like there's just this natural unfolding. And, you know, I've been talking a lot recently about kind of the balance between spiritual mystic awakening alongside of like activism in the world. And like, I think a lot of people misinterpret spiritual seeking as being apathetic,
right,
you know, and being highly individualized and you know, self-centered and all these things. And I think that's a misread. I really think that the more you undo the falseness of yourself, you actually begin to radiate a level of compassion and awareness and kindness that actually does help other people, and you become more powerful in the dream.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I think that's such a powerful thing, right? And I try to say something similar. Again, I always take a psychological perspective, as that was always my my educational background and their own like
Love it.
terminology I'm
Yeah,
used
yeah.
to.
Love psychology.
But I'm always like, look, it's not about, it's not that it's individualistic to focus on yourself. It's the most selfless thing you can do, because firstly, there is no separation. So that's an illusion. But secondly, because when I actually start working on myself and I start dismantling what I call unconscious behavior patterns, or recognizing unconscious behavior patterns that I'm stuck in because of early child or emotional wounds from my childhood, and I'm acting them out in every relationship, by me focusing on myself and the journey inwards,
you're freeing others of having to
exactly,
experience your exactly.
exactly. I'm not pushing my toxicity out into the world, which would then create more of those patterns and more suffering into the world. But I think I understand in part the apathy, or like the disdain towards a little bit of the spiritual individualism, because before, when I was a diehard atheist, I would look at monks specifically, because I really looked up to monks, and I'd be like, kind of started to
They're
resent them,
admirable,
because I was like, what's going on with them? Like, they got so much wisdom. I learned so much when I see them on these YouTube videos as a teenager, but why aren't they out there preaching? Why aren't they out there doing something? How dare they sit upon their monastery and just have their peace? Like, why aren't they changing the world? You know, and there is that inclination, when we haven't yet figured out that kind of wisdom about, it's about like your own journey, so to speak, and that journey frees others, that it's easy to point at the person who looks enlightened and go, how fucking dare you not to share that? Why are you not being an active change in the world, so to speak? Because the way that we define active, you know, is very different in the secular world. We're like, you need to be out there protesting, and if you're not out there protesting, you're not making a difference.
Yeah, and the ego loves to point out that and judge that, which, by the way, the ego is a part of all of us. You're not, you know, I'm not making that accusation towards you, but that's from a psychological standpoint, the ego is always going to go, well, why aren't they doing that? You know, what are they, you know? And there's a great, actually, his name's Hanim Sunim. He's a Korean Buddhist monk who does talks, writes books. He's kind of a young Thich Nhat Hanh kind of energy. He's really great. And yeah, R.I.P. Thai. But Hanim Sunim is kind of carrying the torch, and he did a talk at Google, and, you know, very like engineer crowd, you know, and this one guy raises his hand and says, you know, doesn't the advancement of civilization come from kind of struggle? Basically, was this guy's, you know, deep question. He said, you know, isn't the challenges of our lives what kind of motivates us and like pushes us forward? And basically he said, like, wouldn't nothing get done if we were all just Buddhist monks meditating? You know, essentially what he said. And Anderson kind of laughed and said, you know, I've never been more energized. You know, I've never been. He's founded a school. You know, he's written 3 books. He's traveling the world teaching and talking, and, I think that's the idea, is like the more you improve your own capacity, you just become this force of energy for the better, to be able to help people. So
That's awesome.
happy
I
to
mean,
point that out. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I am of the belief, and in that respect, what energy are you referring to? Because I know in chapter 2 you talk about the true radical teaching of Jesus. So
Mhm.
what is the true radical teaching then? What did the Christians miss?
The Christians, yeah, seek the truth. The truth shall set you free is definitely one that is hard. And also, like, I realize some people have had an issue with me even saying, like, how dare he presume to know? I'm really just quoting Yogananda and of course in Miracles and the world mystics, and just Meister Eckhart. I'm really just
Nice.
I'm a commercial for the masters throughout the ages. May my sincere intention is that my work is a billboard for higher wisdom than my humble self. But that said, I mean, I think what a lot of quantum mechanics is pointing to, and maybe we can go in this direction, despite that not being my expertise, is what the mystics have said. And really, like, for me, the Advaita Vedanta is about as high up as it gets. Zen Buddhism is about as high up as it gets. Mystic and contemplative Christianity, mystic and contemplative Islam, mystic and contemplative Judaism are all extremely, extremely high wisdom. And the cohesive theme is we are one. The mind, there's one mind. And which you pointed that earlier. There's a really good quote by Nisargadatta, who is like reads like a psychedelic trip guide or something like that. Everything he said is crazy. He says, "My world is myself. I am at home. You are the pure awareness that illuminates consciousness and its infinite content. Awareness is primordial. It is the original state, beginningless, endless, uncaused, unsupported. There can be no consciousness without awareness, and there can be awareness without consciousness." Oof. These guys just
speaking my language.
yeah, it's really cool. So yeah, I mean, I think the more you go down the rabbit hole, you see the separation just undo. And I have a ways to go. I don't make any claims to be enlightened. I don't have a community. I'm not starting anything. I'm just
You're not starting a
sharing message. I mean, if you want to sign up for my email list, it's free.
There you go. That's Bob Peck's cult right there. His email list.
I'll just send you these books for free via email.
Boom. That's awesome, dude. And then what is your, I mean, you said that Zen Buddhism, Sufism, and all these things are kind of like the grand wisdom, so to speak, or you see it like that. Why? What is the...
Without ranking, I don't necessarily want to rank things, because I do, I think that there's a path for there's a very wide variety of like psychodynamic differences and needs on planet Earth. And like, I think Gandhi, someone said, like, there's 4 billion religions. It's like there's a path for everyone. So it's high and lower is not the best way to describe it. But I do think that the way it's been categorized through Disappearance of the Universe, which is a really great book about A Course in Miracles, which basically starts at duality. Duality is like separation consciousness. And then non-duality is like unity consciousness. Non-duality just means not two. And so you can kind of, from a categorical standpoint, place systems on a spectrum from duality to semi-non-duality to non-duality. And so Advaita is non-dual. Yeah, totally. So a dual system is kind of standard American Christianity, if you will. God is on a cloud or a throne, and we're down here, and that's a dual system, and we're so separate from him. We're unworthy without Jesus. Oh, and by the way, just let's make a note, because you asked what's the real teaching of Jesus, and I started talking about Nisargadatta. So let's come back maybe to Gospel of Thomas and some of the mystic stuff. But the dual system of Abrahamic traditions is it's God is separate, and it's very us and them. Us and them, that's the dual. Whereas non-dual is Zen. Non-dual is Advaita. Non-dual is A Course in Miracles. It's really just seeing this world as a dream, seeing this world as this kind of illusory projection of our own internal separateness, of our own false sense of separateness. Nisargadatta says, I'm on a Nisargadatta kick with you today. He says, I am dead already. Physical death will make no difference in my case. I am timeless being. I'm free of desire or fear because I do not remember the past or imagine the future. Where there are no names and shapes, how can there be desire and fear? With desirelessness comes timelessness. I am safe because what is not cannot touch what is. You feel unsafe because you imagine danger. Once you realize your own assailable being, you will be at peace. So it's just tapping in. You're just tapping into this kind of infinite capacity that it's not self-generated necessarily, but it is self-removed. You're just removing, you're just polishing the mirror, is a term from Eastern.
Let me give you pushback. But what are you talking about? Isn't this a mirror? Aren't I on the couch? Isn't there a table in front of me?
Well, when you're in a dream, it feels real.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, and there are rules in the dream. I'm not saying that you should jump off a building and say I can fly, because there's laws that govern this plane. But I think the consciousness being fundamental, like this is kind of the quantum mechanics direction. There's a lot of really groundbreaking science, and I'm not a scientist. And I also, let me just say, disclaimer, which is that I think a lot of spiritual teachers will say, like, well, quantum physics proves spirituality. And that's not quite the case. I try to make that point in the book to say, like, I don't want to, appropriate, to use that word, appropriate physicists that spent their life, trying to make a point that, a TED Talk spiritual author can just be like, well, so, I'm aware of that nuance, but there's a really great book, actually, let me reference it. It's called An End to Upside Down Thinking by Mark Gober. It's really, really fantastic. And basically what Gober does is he isolates this variety of anomalies across scientific disciplines. So there's anomalies in all these different fields of science. And what he says is, from the scientific materialism view, which is that matter is fundamental, these anomalies are unexplainable. They're big question marks. But if you play, and consciousness in the scientific materialism pyramid, consciousness is the last thing. It comes after brains. It's matter, biochemistry, animals, mammals, humans, brains, consciousness. But in the consciousness is fundamental view, you're not changing anything except you're just placing consciousness at the foundational layer, and then matter, and then everything else. And so what he says is that when you point to look at all of these anomalies across all these scientific disciplines, consciousness is fundamental is a perfect explanation for these voids, essentially, of understanding. So yeah, I mean, that's what the hell Nisargadatta is talking about. That's what the mystic language is talking about, is that, and the Hermetic literature, which I'm sort of newer too, but super cool, says the same damn thing. And it's really, really beautiful. It's another one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, the first Hermetic principles, mind is one, all is mind. So yeah, I think like I said, I don't dishonor the dream and the work, and back to the Gita does talk a lot about that. It's like, you're still doing the work, and that's karma yoga. You're still acting in the world. You're still feeding the hungry. You're still relieving suffering of other people. You wake up and do what you have to do, but you're just detaching from it. You're just removing your fixation on the outcome.
I think that's really awesome. It kind of echoes the wisdom of like Ram Dass a little bit, where I think Albert, where he talks a lot about, it's like, if for him it didn't destroy the world, it made it a playground. It's like now there's this play element, and I feel it gets lighter.
The whole thing gets a lot lighter.
Absolutely, man. I get to approach life I mean, part of my whole brand, El Nino, the inner child, is like, I really do buy that. Like,
Yeah.
when you see the world through a spiritual lens, it's not a nihilistic pacifist, like apathy of like, oh, nothing matters. This is unreal. Fuck it, throw myself off a building. It's more like, oh my God, I don't have to take those things as seriously, right? You can, like you said, it's great wisdom
Yeah.
in detaching. But I think, unfortunately, these words, because of the fundamental nature of the modern secular world and like science, attachment we think is like a inherently positive things because we're taking a
Yeah.
psychological Western lens.
Detachment can be pejorative. You're right. Yeah, it's
Exactly right.
tough. Yeah.
And people are like, what? Like, so you're just going to become like detached, like you're not going to care. And I try, that's not true. And right, the Buddha would argue that the best way to love is unattached, right? When you love selflessly without yourself, you truly love somebody. You're not loving them for a role or an expectation that they might fulfill for you. That is ego love. That's what can this person do for me?
Do for me. That's
right.
not, that's conditional.
That's conditional,
Yeah.
right? So I really want to, I guess, hammer that point home, right? When Bob, when you talk about detachment, or it's not an uncaring, cold thing. It's almost like a warm embrace of a greater perspective, right?
Totally. And very well said. And I think you're right about qualifying some of these words. And even reality is a word that a lot of people go, well, what's the reality, and all this stuff. And well, the Vedic definition, for example, of reality is different than kind of the Western definition. The Western definition is what you can feel and touch and taste with your senses, which we know by now are wholly incapable of understanding anything. They're not so good.
I think you mentioned something in the book about radio waves and like that, and it relates to this. Maybe
yeah, it does. Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, the Vedic definition is eternal, self-luminous, and unchanging. So those are the three qualities of reality within the Advaita and Vedic Indian philosophy. Eternal, unchanging, and self-luminous. And so very few things meet that definition, right? And the other one I was going to say, let's talk about radio waves, but the other thing I was going to say was surrender.
Surrender.
That's a word Ram Dass loves to unpack, because in the West, it's just like white flag, I'm a loser, take over, comes take my, you won the war, take our women, I've surrender.
It's linked to powerlessness.
It's linked to powerlessness. And and Islam, even the word submission, which is also
submit to God,
has that kind of degrading feel to it. And I think from the mystic angle, it's like, it's liberation, surrender out of liberation, because we're just so tight. You just go, oh no, you can just surrender. You can kind of, that really, again, back to the Tao, there's just this unfolding, this natural unfolding. What's the Lao Tzu, which is nature doesn't hurry, yet everything's accomplished. Stuff like it's just flowing, baby. You don't have to. You can just surrender to it. Yeah, exactly. No, the radio waves analogy is amazing, and that's one I use often, which is from Sri Teshwar, who's Yogananda's guru. It's in Autobiography of a Yogi, which Yogananda's masterpiece about his life. And basically says, look, radio waves are traveling through us right now, and you can't hear them, but they're there. And what you just need to do is adjust the receiver. When you adjust the receiver to the right transmission of that frequency, you hear the music. And that's all we're doing from a spiritual standpoint is essentially what he says is love is constantly poured, or whatever you want to call it, higher energy, higher wisdom, unity consciousness is constantly coming into this plane. But we have, the Hindu joke is like rusty wires, rusty wiring. So we're just improving the mechanics through spiritual practices, which vary, meditation, yoga, but also service, compassion, forgiveness, these qualities. It's like, it's not, it just, that's intuitively sits with me in my heart. And I've started to notice some of the fruits of it, so it's happy to parrot them all day long.
I think there's a lot of spiritual wisdom in the recognition. it's weird because look, we live in such a hyper individualistic, competitive, a little bit
Yeah.
selfish society that like you have to, in my point of view, to get people into this world, you have to like play a little bit to this. And you can be like, hey, look, what if I told you that if you started serving others, you'll serve yourself in the highest form? What if I told you, it's like I'm parroting Jesus, right? It's like, what if I
Yeah.
told you that in this world you give more to others and then the universe will give it back to you? And it's like these are truths, right? I feel like in my point of view now, I'm
Well,
like, these are,
parables, if you
yeah,
will. Yeah.
yes, really. I'm like, they're parables, but that's like a great avenue into this wisdom, into this selflessness. Is how can I prod on their selfishness? How can I bring them in from themselves? Because that's what
Yeah.
I think we are as a culture. We're so attached to ourselves, right? Everybody has an identity. We all have our own brands, for Christ's sake, right? We all have something that is ours and that's impermanently ours. And as such, maybe that's like the good way to get it. Okay, how can I help you help yourself more? And
How can you judo move that
yes.
that obsession? Daniel has a word that I love. Daniel Tayak, who is our spiritual talk friend, who's great. He said it the other day. I wrote it down. I'm obsessed with this, and I told him this. I said I'm using this all over and quoting you half the time. But he said it's just a mascot.
Mm.
He says once you know it's a mascot, then you can really focus on the message of it. Like the message is all that you're delivering through the mascot. Just like, okay, I'm liking that. It's like I am cosmic cowboy. My wife calls me Ned Flanders, like in East Austin. I'm like, hey guys, like I'm SpongeBob, I'm spiritual SpongeBob. And like I think the more you kind of embrace that like characteristic, like whatever the characteristic is, like in a fun way, in a light way, it's liberating, in a sense, because you're not personaless. You have the persona, but that's okay. You're not you're under it. You're beneath it,
Right.
or foundational to it. But the persona is a part of the interaction with the other personas.
See, I'd love to hear you expand on this, because I think a lot of in new age spiritual realms, no offense, I'm obviously a critic of everything because that's my thing, is I'm a rational skeptic critic. We see a lot of, in my point of view, big egos convincing their audiences and others alike that they have no ego, which is, I think, one of the biggest jokes of all time. And what is that relationship, right, where you're saying, right, here you are, this, in my point of view, a mystic, a modern mystic, well-studied, quite wise, really in depth with the scholarly text. Yet you're going, oh, I definitely have an ego. I have a persona. I'm playing this shit up, right? I'm heavily acknowledging this thing. And maybe as such, it doesn't have as much, let's say, control over you. Yet we see a different arena growing online in other spaces of people claiming they have no ego. What's your point or take on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I might not have like a super cohesive, tidy answer for you, because it's something I'm really working with. But, I do believe, like A Course in Miracles, which is another non-dual philosophy. It's very, very, very solid. Big fan. I write about it in the book. It talks about, the ego is essentially the separation. The ego is the barriers. And so you are trying to undo it. I think that I'm seeing people too talk about like, kill your ego, but I love my ego. Don't kill your ego. That's killing anything means you're, and it's like, I actually don't think it's either of those. I don't think you're killing the ego, and I don't think you're loving the ego. I think you're just undoing it. You're just undoing it gradually. You're letting it melt away. And so I would actually make a distinction kind of between the persona or mascot component. There's an idea in A Course that the sole purpose of the body is a communication device. Mm-hmm. And that's more of kind of what I'm talking about when I say the persona, the role that I'm playing. Yeah. Whereas ego mind is more a dictator. It's more, it's constantly wanting things from other people. It's constantly needing it. If you're ever embarrassed, you're in the ego. If you're ever ashamed, if you're ever disappointed, even. I mean, there's a great list from a ACIM teacher I like. It's kind of like how to know if you're in the ego mind. The ego mind is very concerned with the reputation and the perception of others, and it's always need. And so I do think that it's worth investigating that part of ourselves and that thought system and undoing it over time. But yeah, I'm definitely having fun with kind of the persona and the body as a communication device to channel this message. I think Jesus was speaking to Jews in Galilee about oneness. You're speaking to your audience in Canada that need your voice, that actually we're global now, but everyone has a dharmic quality, a duty, responsibility, I think, to share your own wisdom, your own kind of loving experience, your loving awareness in a way that's palatable or accessible to other people. I think,
Right.
Kind of post-Christian people who did mushrooms and, want to learn more about Jesus and Buddha, like my thing, it's like, we're just speaking to people that have a similar kind of experiential aspect via that persona thing. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. And I hope that answers your question, because the ego pieces we could do a whole, we could do a whole week on ego mentality and mindset. And, it does seem to be the adversary. It does
Right.
seem to be the adversary to undo. But there's also some real wisdom in a course and a couple other texts about, it's actually nothing. It's actually empty, because it's separation. It's not, it's not from creator.
Yeah, see, I think I really have always resonated with the Watts perspective on ego when he talks about, it's like, look, you're trying to get rid of your ego, but then you're trying to do it with your ego, because that's the thing.
You're
that
making it
wants
real.
something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, you're making it real. You're trying to bite. It's like me going, hey, bite your teeth. Like what? Bite your own teeth. It's like kind of this impossible task, or like look at the back of your neck. All right, and that's why I guess I'm a critic of people suggesting that you can get rid of your ego. It's like, no, because then what you're implying is that there's a process by which, like, that there's like a desired point to get rid of this thing, but in doing that, you're coming from a place of ego mind, right? And from that place, you won't get rid of it, because a lot of them then start preaching like Puritan values, or like, oh yeah, like your ego is linked to this food and these vibrations.
Right.
And they start giving another form. In my point of view, they start projecting their own beliefs and their own dogmatic narratives now onto other people, but that's just their own ego needing validation for their perspective, right? And instead of kind of sitting in a stillness and a oneness that doesn't need to project, like we were talking about the other day with the spiritual talk friends. It's like, the truth doesn't need a defense, man.
Yeah,
and
I love that line. It's great.
Yeah, it's a great line. And yeah, I tend to have my own criticism or frustration when I see people begin preaching like, oh, there is a way like to do this, as if it's not like, hey, no, the way is to recognize there is no ego. It's like, is to sit in stillness, right? The moment that you keep talking about it, you're creating the problem.
Yeah, and I think, what I would point to is the paths. The really, it's the 4 yogas, but there's variation there, but that's kind of how they're commonly referred. And I think essentially the main ones are Jnana yoga, which is and yoga just means path of unification, right? To yoke, to unite. So jnana means kind of intellectual, mental path. Bhakti yoga is devotional, kind of emotional, expressive path. Karma yoga means service to others, essentially, path. And then Raja yoga is kind of the 4th. It's like a culmination, but there's a lot of egoic argumentation on what comprises Raja. But anyway, Yanis, Bhaktas, and Karma yogis. And, I think what I'm hearing in yours is, I think you might be more of a Bhakta, which is kind of more of a creative, expressive, experiential, while, a Yanni, for example, does have an intellectual unfolding of ego, to kind of counterpoint what you're just saying. Like, I think there actually are multiple paths that is based on our own psychodynamic needs. And Yanni, you know, the funny relationship between these guys, and this is what's totally absent in American Christianity. You know, Yannis see bhaktas and think they're, you know, crazy and just dancing around, you know, what the hell are they doing, crying, you know. And bhaktas see Yannis and they're like, God, these guys are so cold. And, you know, just sitting there, you know, they're in the karma yogi saying nobody's doing anything, you know, that's planet Earth, you know, but they're all paths, you know.
I think that's such an awesome thing what you said. They're all paths. What I really try to preach, especially on this podcast, is, you know, where's the nuance? There is no black and white. And you said something earlier that I kind of want to push, like, hit home. It's there are 7 billion paths to enlightenment, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they're all right. None of them are wrong. None of them are right. And right. It's like, that's it. And I think it's emblematic. I always love the story of the Tower of Babel, right? Where I see it's like, you know, they tried to reach God with this tower and then God spites them and they all start speaking different languages. I've super oversimplified that. But in my perspective of it, it's like, yeah, because we all are speaking about, we're trying to talk about the same thing. We're all trying to point to God, point to oneness, but we're all speaking slightly different languages. And then because we kind of misunderstand each other, we have to attack each other. We fall into war, we fall into division, we fall into separation. And I think that's why we need to, I guess, cultivate some degree of tolerance and acceptance that, hey, look, like you said, that guy's got his own path towards it. I think he's crazy because he's cold or whatever. He looks at me and goes, what's all those eccentricities with that guy, huh? Like, what's all that about? That must be ego. But it's like, no, I'm just crazy and expressive.
Yeah, no, I love that. 7 billion paths to enlightenment. That's really, I think that sums it up, you know, for me. Like Ram Dass was asked, like, which religion? And he said, oh, they're all true. You know, it's like they're all vehicles. And I think kind of, you know, for me, and kind of back to the book a little bit, the first part is about Jesus and Bible kind of deconstruction, but appreciation of Jesus. And the second part is really about Hindu philosophy. And for me, that was really what opened me up huge was Yogananda and Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna has some of the best lines about this stuff. He says, you know, how many ways are there to get to a roof? You could climb a ladder, you can climb a tree, you can scale the wall, you know, they all get you up onto the roof, but they're all different quote unquote paths. The 4 blind men and the elephant, it's attributed to him sometimes, but it's also kind of a Hindu proverb, which is, you know, an elephant, you know, walks up through this village. There's 4 blind men that come out and feel different parts of it. Oh, this animal is like a tree trunk. No, that's the leg. You know, this animal's like a snake. Oh no, that's the tail. This animal's like a spear. No, that's just the tusk. You know, each blind man has his own component understanding. But then a man with sight comes, or a woman with sight. Let's break the patriarchy. You know, a woman with sight comes in and says, you know, you're all right that the leg of the elephant it is like a column. You know, you're right about that, but that's just one aspect. And I think it's a really nice image of, you know, God even, which is a word that I very never use, but, you know, source, creator, ever new joy. Sri Teshwar says ever new joy. Yeah, the infinite. It's just beyond all of our silly little component aspect mindsets.
In that, then, to that point, from your perspective, Bob Peck, like, I know you like to humble yourself unto the greats, and I think that's a great practice. I try to kind of do that myself. And you call yourself a remixer, and you said you've remixed.
Basically, I'm girl talk.
Hell yeah. But on that note, for you, because you're saying, what do you think is an ideal? Let's say you get to imagine an ideal world, right? Is it that we all have a one world understanding, or is it that we just simply kind of respect the fact that each person, if you were to, you know, pry them a bit, kind of has a different perspective on the truth and the oneness, but as long as they're being, you know, respectful or loving, you know, what is your idealized version of spirituality?
Very unpopular. Let's hear it. It's an unpopular opinion. You know, the hardcore non-dual systems don't give a ton of weight to this world. And I think that is the difficulty, especially for people new to that material, because again, it sounds apathetic. But I mean, the book Disappearance of the Universe is that line, that phrase is based on the idea that when the last seeming separation of God, because they were not separate, the last seeming separation of God remembers the true identity, the entire universe disappears. So essentially, this is separation land. And so there's no heaven on earth. I think that's a lot of like, that's an ego, the ego of religion. It's like, we're going to create this heaven on earth. Again, super unpopular opinion, because everybody wants a better, harmonious world. And like, of course, I don't want, wars and strife and suffering and things like that. But it seems like, kind of what the non-dual, what the mystic traditions say is, this world is a bridge. It's a dream, it's a bridge, and it's a perfect, use the word playground. Vivekananda's gymnasium. We come here to get strong. It's this kind of temporal, passing through. We're just passing through. And so in the meantime, you don't, I'm avoiding getting too obsessed with making sure that, every little illusory detail is, exactly harmonious, because it seems impossible. It seems like, and this is a little Gnostic. I realize we're on the last few minutes here, so I won't get into it too much, but the Gnostic tradition, within the early Christian church, it's as early as the Orthodox. Don't listen to the Christians on my comments. The Gnostics are very good, and they're very early. And they basically said, wait a second, this Old Testament God is awfully demanding. He's pretty judgmental. He's a jealous God. But the God that Jesus is talking about is loving, and the love of God, it falls on the just and the unjust, like the rain. How do you reconcile these two? And a lot of Christians try, and that's what Christian apologetics are. But the Gnostics, Marcion was the first person to say this, the Old Testament God could very well be a false creator God that created this world. And, of course, in miracles, a lot of mystic traditions would agree with that this is separation land created by, the split mind, to use, of course, terminology. So I want a better world, and I'm going to, I've been involved in food bank stuff. I've been involved in kind of activism, documentary, and those things make my heart chakra vibrate. And so I'm going to keep doing them. But from the perspective of, passersby, I think, passing through.
Man, that's awesome. Thank you. I have a similar viewpoint on that, where like, I'm kind of like, look, I kind of think that this earth, like you said, it's like this is hell. Like, this is the place. Like, this is the place where you come to suffer. This is the place you come to grow. You can make it your own kingdom on, like, you can go to heaven. You can find heaven here. But like, what you are, like what the core of what you are, that awareness, that resonant energy that's always been and always will be, you're not from here. Like, this is, you're passing by temporarily. And then if you listen to the scientists, they'll say the same thing. You're a vibrating set of atoms, and it seems like you came from stars and you've temporarily rearranged into a physical human body. And I go, great, you're talking about the same thing, my friend. You're just saying it in slightly different words. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I know I said an hour, but I really want to ask you about, because it wouldn't be my podcast, the hippie, spiritualist, psychedelic man I am, if I didn't ask you about your experience with psychedelics and how the psychedelic experience plays into spirituality and mysticism. So
yeah, totally. And I love, I'm just a big fan of yours, Nino. I appreciate your insights and your articulation, and we'll look forward if you put a book out. I'll be the first review on Amazon. But yeah, psychedelics are cool. I definitely don't think they're for everyone.
No.
And I love the Alan Watts line, you have to take your eye off the microscope, and take your, jot down your notes, because if you just stay all day with the microscope, and really, you mentioned Ram Dass a lot, he's massive to me. And really that seemed like that was a big part of his kind of journey and life lesson, which is you always come down from those, you always come down. And I want to get something that is, I hear he says, I don't want to get high, I want to get free. And so I really honor that. And I write a little bit, there's a few chapters on psychedelics in the book, where I reference the Maharaji story. So I'll just tease that, but there's some famous stories, where essentially the idea is that very, very awakened beings actually operate at a level of consciousness above psychedelic consciousness. But I do think they're very useful. I'm thrilled they're becoming more legal in the States. I think that they're much more preferable to than most pharmaceutical drugs. I think pharmaceutical drugs are, for the right person, and talk to your doctor, and deep bow to people that find joy and value from pharmaceuticals, and because I think they do. But also at the same time, there's been, especially in America, ravaging, really grave injustice. I think that where we overprescribed. And so sacred plant medicine is a nice, healthy, generally healthy. I talk about the lethality levels and in the book a little bit. Terence McKenna is great. He's the philosopher, right? Sacred plant medicine, the modern age. But yeah, I think they're great for breaking down boundaries. They undo ego. They give you a glimpse, and so they're nice. They're a nice way to help you break habitual patterns and things like that. But they're not the end all be all.
They're not the end all be all. Then how do you reconcile when people like Terence McKenna are like suggesting that they are revealing different aspects of this interdimensional reality? Let's use a bit of his language, right? It's like it's revealing different aspects of the interdimensional reality, and you can interact with beings, for instance, in the DMT realm, and these beings are real. How do you reconcile that?
It's not really my specialty.
Okay, fair enough.
But I think that the ancient shamanic traditions are the most interesting, component of world history, basically. And I think that we got away from them in the modernity and industrialization of planet Earth. Like we've really disconnected from nature and from sacred plant medicine. And I'll no comment on extra dimensional. I'm open to it, but again, it's not my specialty. But I honor a lot of what the sacred plant medicine stuff is. And even just there's a center in Austin that just opened up, the psychedelic therapy, nice. In Austin, Texas. So it's definitely coming, and I think that hopefully it has value for people. There's also a really great book that I'm sure you're familiar with called How to Change Your Mind, by Michael Pollan, who's a New York Times writer. He really legitimized a lot of this kind of psychedelic renaissance because he's a food writer, and I think he's won a Pulitzer. He's a super famous writer, right? And he wrote about he calls himself a hesitant, or what did he say, an hesitant psychonaut or something like that, because he took some for his journalism. And I'll point people to that, but ultimately I think for me it was really kind of a step on the ladder, if you will. It's not the whole picture.
Yeah, just a rung on the ladder.
Rung on the ladder. Yeah.
Because how many people do, I mean, in my own life, how many people do we, and even listeners know, who they've had a pretty profound mystical experience, but they don't really integrate it into their daily life. There's no spiritual practice. There's no growing awareness, and that's it's not it wasn't the answer.
It can help melt down barriers.
Yeah,
kind of in yourself, and even in ideas. I think that's why
Yes.
Terence McKenna was so polymathy, right? Is because he would see the connections between the I Ching and like computer software, in like the 90s. Like he was
Yeah.
just a madman in a beautiful way. And I've done that too. I've thought, oh wow, that's a connection here in my life that I did, and so bridging kind of new neuronal pathways is can be super useful. But yeah, I think you can easily go. I just had a friend of mine, she said the DMT entities told her, "What are you doing here?" They said, "You got to stop coming here."
Yeah.
Basically, they basically, articulated that. And she goes, I haven't done it since. They kind of got mad at me. So
Like, oh geez.
I need to kind of move on and do some meditation. Yeah. So
Well,
anyway,
if there
thanks,
was,
Nino.
thank you. Hey, if there was one piece of wisdom, value, message from your book, Original Sin is a Lie, How Spirituality Defies Dogma and Reveals Our True Self, well, what little wisdom would you impart with people today?
You have it in you. You have all of it within your heart, within your mind. And that's what all of these traditions say. That's what the true meaning of spirituality is that you have this infinite spark. You have the spark of infinity deep within your heart that we've covered up with past actions and negative self-doubt, self-judgment, self-guilt, all these things. And I would even say that, this is tied to our relationship with Creator, which is that the love of Creator is inescapable. There's just, you can't get away, no matter how much we cover it up. It's, that love is unconditional and timeless. And, every being is a part of it. And, what is it? No man is an island. You just lower the water and see the commonality.
Love it. Thank you so much, Bob.
Beautiful.